I am coming across a lot of spiritual terms, and whether it's in my clinic or as a practitioner or just reading, and I've never heard of them, but they're very, very popular. So can I run a few past you and you can fact or fiction? Soul contracts.
There's not something that I've come across, but that's not the point. Let me start with Sphinx Spiritual. Our major point of difference is that there's nothing from the human mind in there. Everything we give and pass on is not only from spirit, but in the terminology of spirit. Therefore, it's not in any respect religious or like religion. Religions interpret, and they have specific languages, which includes the term soul. But that's not spiritual. In spiritual terms, it's called a spirit. Soul is something different, but it's referred to in religion. So it's got a common usage religiously, but it's not spiritual. Because we get all of our information directly from the spiritual world, from our guides, we've become quite technical purists. And we therefore understand common usage, but they can lead people astray. For example, the word karma. Karma doesn't happen in the one life, it comes later, but everyone now has said that's karma when something happens 5 minutes later. That's okay because it's a common usage. It's factually or technically wrong, but it's giving people some basic level of awareness. Then we get to something like soul contracts. I must say that contract sounds very much like a legal term, and soul's a religious term. So some soul-style guru has interpreted some piece of information and turned it into a piece of knowledge for whatever reason. I'm not going to put any potential reason. Spirit has never and will never use the term soul, and they'll never use the term contract. So in other words, it's not purely spiritual. It's been turned into some quasi-religious thing using earthly language or an interpretation of something, and indeed we would say a false interpretation. If we now try and make sense of what that might mean, we all have a predetermination. And in that predetermination of our life, there are things we're meant to do. There are experiences we're meant to have, and they'll be put before us. And that will happen. There's also a karma, or lots of facets to karma, which means that we will owe someone something. But it might not be to a person. It might be more generically to the earth at large, or society at large. So karma doesn't always relate to a person, but it can. What we're getting to is that if someone says, I've got a soul contract, well, you've got a contract with yourself, if we want to use that language. You've got an agreement with yourself, which you had from the spiritual world, to be who you are, to be who you're meant to be, and to do what you came to do. If we put it into basic spiritual language, that's all it is. We don't have a soul contract with anyone else. We might or might not have an agreement to help them. We might or might not have a karmatic condition to repay something to them. That's where it stops and that's where it finishes. So it's an abuse of language because Spirit does not use terms other than spiritual terms in the most common basic language. If it's mythical, we don't do it. If it's mystical, we don't do it because they cloud reality.
And on that, there's also people that are programmed or that we're meant to meet, though, aren't we, in each life?
Yeah.
So I wonder if
it's
maybe
predetermined.
we're predetermined.
Yeah. There's all sorts of possibilities it might mean, but if we get hung up on an interpretation which ends up, we can only interpret because it's not being given purely from spirit. So therefore the mind comes into it, which then makes it quasi-religious because it's being interpreted by the mind incorrectly, which is what religion's done.
And remember, in this Kala we cannot afford to forget about free will. Let's assume in a past life you came to me for help. Let's assume I was a wealthy business person and you were having bad times and lost your money and couldn't feed your children. And let's assume you came to me for help and I said no and I ignored you. And we come together again in this lifetime and I have something to learn about that. So you're going to be sent to me again, and in this lifetime I'm meant to make the decision that I will help you in whatever way it is. Therefore I complete my karma, learn that I shouldn't have done that and have repaired that karma. But that's all beautiful if that all worked. But there's a thing called free will. I can decide again in this lifetime whether I'm going to help you or whether I am not. If I say no a second time, then I have the karma again, and the karma will be doubled again in the next life that I have to you. And that will go on until I choose to repay that in one way or another. Over lifetimes, 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 you'll reappear again in different ways and means. That, if you could call that a soul contract, but it's not. It's karma, and it's free will in action.
So our answer, fact or fiction, soul contract, fiction.
My next one, twin flames.
That's interesting because it has no spiritual basis. Zero, none at all. The only possible thing it could be tried to relate to is a thing called kindred spirits. There are no entities who are incarnated or created originally in twos. Just hasn't happened. They're created in 16s. And that 16, group of 16, have a duty to help each other. Some will be living at the same time as others, not all. No matter what, they've got a duty to continue to help each other. The relationship between that 16 can be good, can be bad, but it'll always be a little bit volatile, a little bit difficult if one believes the other's holding them back and they need to be picked up. But there's a sense of trust and there's a sense of duty. There are no twins. In that 16, you'll live in different lives. You occasionally might be in a relationship, not always, in fact, mostly not, but you'll be in a position to come to each other at a turning point in your life. You don't search for your 16. The predetermination of life means they come to you. It's quite automatic. It happens. It's predetermined. It will happen. And those not on earth in the spiritual world will be there all of the time trying to do their bit to help you. So it's just a mythical misinterpretation to say there are twin flames of anything, and that includes twins. They have another purpose, but it's got nothing to do with put as this. You're part of a 16, you're not part of a 2. How someone got to that, who would know? But all I can say to you is that it's man's interpretation of something they've got from somewhere which has become misconstrued, again, because it's an interpretation that turns it into the quasi-religious. And it's just inaccurate. Now, I'm not saying people won't follow that and get waylaid by it or whatever. That's up to them. Factually, it's not right.
It is possible to be a twin, a genetic DNA twin, and to be 16s. That's possible. But it's not 2. You have 14 more. You're part of 14 others.
What about my soulmate?
That's again a loose set of religious language, soulmate, or it's usually used to mean I've married the right person and they're my kindred spirit. Rarely are they, and I don't know whether soulmates actually stick together or not, because there's been no evidence that they do or don't, if indeed such a thing happens. It's just a misuse of a term again. However, it's a bit like the abuse of the term karma. It brings a sense of common usage or common knowledge, which increases to some small degree a knowledge about spirituality, but it can take it off track by putting it back into religious terms. Religion and spirituality are very, very separate.
So from a fact point of view, what's Spirit's definition of kindred spirit?
One of the 16 you started with, and one of the 16 after all of your lives you have to finish with, and you can only finish when you all get to the appropriate level. So there's a reliance upon each other to help each other along and not get left behind, because if you get left behind, you'll be waiting up at the end.
And because you're 16 doesn't mean that you travel at the same speed and the same achievement. And because you're one of a 16, you can achieve A standard, A plus in one lifetime and go back in the next lifetime. You get created together. In the first creation, you're created together. You don't all finish together. You finish and wait for the rest and get very agitated that the others have dropped behind.
Because you believe you've married the right person or in a relationship with the right person doesn't make them your kindred spirit.
I know people would want to say, how can I identify a 16?
The identification of a 16 requires specialist knowledge and help. There are methods to guide people, but it's a complex topic, and frankly, we don't want it abused.
For more spiritual knowledge, remember to subscribe. If any of the information Ian and Pearl spoke about piqued your interest, make sure you like and comment on this video below. There's so much knowledge and advice being delivered from Spirit to you via this channel. Healing your physical and emotional pains will guide you towards a more loving and meaningful life. This is the Spiritual Renaissance.